battling the relentlessly negative doom and gloom news media. It's the Nick Stenger Show, coming to you live from the Stenger Family Office headquarters. It's your host, Nick Stenger.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 131st episode of the Nick Stenger Show. My name is Nick Stenger. We are the Stenger Family Office for the past 42 years. It has been our mission to deliver both clarity and confidence to help secure your financial future. Well, I just want to make one comment on everything going on in Israel right now. It's absolutely terrible, horrible, and awful what we are seeing on a humanitarian level. And I think we're all there that on both sides, this is just tragic. And the terror attacks that have been levied against Israel are truly atrocious, and putting aside all of our political differences, I think we can agree that this is awful. And so our prayers, our thoughts go out to the people of Israel and everything that's going on over there, and hope that gets resolved soon. And I don't want to gloss over the humanitarian part of that, but this is a financial show, so I want to call attention to really what I believe is going on behind the scenes on a financial level. And right or wrong, we try to be right down the middle. We try to call balls and strikes as we see them, which can be difficult. You always risk angering both sides when you do that. But I want to point out the fact that war is a mechanism, and conflicts, terror attacks are a mechanism to keep people in power, and typically behind the scenes there is some sort of financial incentive driving the charge. And so to point out and use Israel as the example right now, because it's so much in the news today, we were talking about Russia, Ukraine, and we can even mention that later as well. But remember, the U.S. government gave Iran $6 billion. And there's no question now, even the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal have been admitting that Iran has been funneling some of that money to the terrorists who have launched these attacks against Israel. Who knows how much of that actually went towards terror versus nuclear weapons. But the reality is that the American taxpayers have donated $6 billion with a B dollars to Iran, and that to me is pretty sad. That's sick. I think that we have a lot of responsibility for the conflict that we're seeing now. Now, the question is, did Israel know about these attacks ahead of time? I'm sure that there was some sort of indication that Hamas was going to attack. Israel is one of the finest defense forces on earth. Sometimes governments do allow these things to happen. I'm not saying I believe this necessarily, but I do believe that governments sometimes allow these things to happen to consolidate control. I think that's been seen many times in history. But now what you're going to see is not only has the U.S. government supported Iran, giving them $6 billion, but on top of that, now it's likely, I don't think it's overtly happened yet, but I would imagine in coming months and weeks, we would find out that the U.S. is now going to be giving money to Israel, which I do think we should do. I think we should support Israel from terror that has benefits for the United States and the rest of the world as well. But think about the reality of giving money to both sides of the war. You may think that's wild. There's no way that that's possible. This is crazy. Well, all it takes is a historical viewpoint to realize that this is not the first time that banks have supported both sides of a war. Rothschild family, the Rockefeller family have been behind most of the major conflicts that we've seen. They've been on the winning side. When they think somebody's going to be a loser, they switch sides sometimes. They fund both sides of a conflict. Why? Because war serves as monetary stimulus. As horrible as it is, war, from a humanitarian standpoint, is just awful. I think we all can agree on that one fact, whether you're right, left, or center. But what I think we can also agree on, if we do a little bit of digging, is that behind the scenes, war stimulates economies, which is horrible. It's a bad incentive structure, but that's just the reality of how the world works. And I think that's what we're seeing. It's not just Israel and Palestine. It's not just what we're seeing with Iran with the 6 billion. It goes much deeper than that. It exists everywhere. Remember, just a few short months ago, we were talking about Ukraine getting $75 billion from the United States. Now ask yourself this question: where does that money come from? It comes from the US government. But where does the US government get those resources from? The US government gets those resources by taxing you and I. Now, think about the incentive structure when you have a central bank that has run amok. And I think that's exactly what this is. We are dealing with a centralized bank with the Federal Reserve, and it's not just Jay Powell. It goes all the way back to the 1900s, the early 1900s, when the Fed was signed into law in 1913, where it has just gotten so stinking big. The Fed has run these massive increases in monetary supply, and realize this for a second, that every time money supply increases, what also increases? The tax base. Think about it. If the government puts 40, 50% more dollars into the economy, everybody has 40 or 50% more money to spend. All that 40 or 50% goes to the business owners, but it gets skimmed off the top by taxes. The federal government benefits from a large Fed. It's so easy to see. It's just common sense. A big Fed creates a big government. Why do you think our founders warned so heavily against a big Fed and a Fed at all? There's a lot of question to me as to why we need a Federal Reserve. Remember, there's that inflation target. The Fed's supposed to target 2.5% inflation. I've done seminars and speeches before where I've asked the crowd, anybody know why the target inflation rate is 2 or 2.5%? Nobody can answer that question. The Fed can't even answer that question. It's built in demand growth. Think about it. If you're a bank, the best possible thing for you to have is growth in deposits. The more deposits you have as a bank, the more lending you can do, the more net interest you earn, and the more profit you make. It's not complicated. Same thing with the biggest bank of all time, which happens to be the Federal Reserve, the bank of all banks. When money supply increases, profitability goes up, dollars go up, and taxes, as a result of a big Fed, get bigger. That's why the government is so stinking big today. So all that to say, I'm not necessarily, I don't have a dog in the fight with Israel versus Palestine. The Hamas is obviously horrible. These people are animals. They're chopping off babies' heads. This is terrible stuff. So I get all of that. I'm watching all of it just like you are in real time. But I want to take a step further back and just point out that the banking dynasties are behind this. There's no question about it. So ultimately what happens, and call this conspiracy, call this Nick, you need to get off a Breitbart or whatever you want to call it. But now widely reported is the fact that big banks and banking institutions consolidating power have led to another factor, which is a one world government. And you think, Nick, that's wild. There's no way we're going to have a one world government. I would encourage you to keep digging a little bit further and realize that we are already quickly approaching this. We are approaching a system, and I think our current White House is moving us towards a world where we are more, we have to answer more to the UN. And I think that's just absolutely ridiculous. That's the whole Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset, where they want to basically centralize power on a global scale into a few hands. So be watching this. And again, some of this is going to come over the next couple of years. But I think war is their number one tool. Conflict is the number one tool of tyrants to consolidate power. Remember, it's divide and conquer. If you can get everybody hating each other, you can get everybody attacking each other and upset. Even though human beings, a lot of us are pretty much the same at the end of the day. If you meet a Democrat or a Republican on the street, somebody who's on the opposite side of the political aisle as you, turns out you have probably a lot more in common than you realize. The job of tyrants is to get us to hate each other over small differences. And so I think that's the world we are in. That is certainly the world that we are going to. And so I would encourage you, as I go back to trying to call balls and strikes as I see it, as we come up to the next election cycle here, just be so careful. Try not to buy into this hating everybody and being upset with everybody and finding differences. We want to try and come together as a population, as a global humanitarian population. We want to try and come together and find things that we can be in agreement on, rather than doing what they want us to do, which is to be against each other. So that is my warning as we go into this next phase. Jamie Dimon said it himself, that this is one of the most dangerous times that we have ever lived in. Jamie Dimon has been known for making these very bold calls, predictions. Not all of them have come true. Not all of them have been correct. And I would say he is right in some ways. This is a dangerous time. We're living through the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We're now living through a conflict in the Middle East. It's very possible that China takes an opportunity now and says, we're going to do something with Taiwan. It certainly is a scary time, but I would not say it's the worst time we've ever lived through. It's not the scariest time we've ever lived through. If you ask any population in America, any generation that's gone before us, and you ask them how things were at the time they were living in, they would have said the same thing. They would have said things were scary back then. We have recency bias as humans. We think that today is the worst things have ever been, and we don't look at the past. We don't realize, we kind of look back fondly, and this is a thing in psychology where human beings look back at the past thinking everything was great, everything was wonderful. Remember people saying the good old days. And there's even a verse in the Bible that says, don't look backwards and talk about the good old days because you don't know what you're talking about. That's literally what it says. And so we just have to put things in perspective. Now, the part that Jamie Dimon is right about is that there are risks out there. There's always been risks. If you're going to be an investor long term, there are risks. There's certainly downside to what's going on geopolitically. And so far, the United States has been a bolster, a ballast against tyranny. And that's the beauty of the United States. We'll see what happens in the future. I'm optimistic, and I do think that we are going to figure it out. I think we are going to rally. There's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, people I meet from all walks of life, who still love this country, who still want to see us as the shining city on the hill, and eventually come together and fight the tyranny. I do think, and I am optimistic long run, because we've done it before, that we will do it again. So stay positive, stay optimistic. Don't buy into this doom and gloom too much. Yes, we have to be aware of risks. Yes, we can't wear rose-colored glasses and think that everything's okay. We have to understand what environment we're dealing with, but at the same time, we cannot just live in a state of fear. And that's what people would want us to do. The tyrants and the global leadership would like us to live in constant fear. That's how they get us to hate each other. That's how they get us to freeze and do nothing, when in reality, we need to stand up and protect the American experiment. The last thing I'll say, when we go through times like this, it just reminds me again and again, and it should be something we do all the time, but certainly in these times of crisis, that it is time to humble yourself, to repent, to get right with God, to use this time to spend with your family, to focus on what matters. Some people have written articles that I really enjoyed. Hug your family, get right with God, use this time to get back to the basics. And that's one of the positives that can come out of this. And it says in Scripture that if we humble ourselves before God, if we repent from our ways, that God will heal our land. And I believe that is eminently true today. So that's enough of that. Let's get into the article and the episode 131, Get Your House in Order. And this is the reality. I've talked about this a lot. I've used that word a lot, dealing with reality as an investor. There's all this geopolitical conflict. There's all these downsides, all this negativity out there. There's risk, certainly. But at the end of the day, we actually have to respond to that. My job as a financial advisor is, one, to protect our clients from making mistakes. Number two, as a portfolio manager, it's to protect your assets and then go even a step further and try and get you a consistent return during all types of environments. That's our mandate. When you hire a financial advisor, that's what you're paying for. You're paying for somebody to protect your family and to grow your net worth and give you some return so you can beat that runaway inflation and the runaway Fed over time. So here's the point of life that we are living in today. I believe we are set for one of the biggest stock market rallies that we have ever seen. Maybe not the biggest, but one of the biggest for sure. And I do believe that stocks will be higher a year from now, 2 years, 3 years from now. There's no guarantees, but when I look at the data, that's what I see. In the meantime, there are risks, and we've talked about those risks. We've talked about Jamie Dimon's comments and all the other doom and gloom predictions that other people have made. Jeremy Grantham, who in particular has predicted the last 50 out of the 2 recessions that have actually happened. So there's all these bears and pundits that come out of the woodwork anytime the market goes down 10 or 15 or 20%, and they claim the sky is falling. You just really got to tune that stuff out, because long run stocks will go up. But in the meantime, you got to get your financial house in order, because what you don't want to do is step on a giant rake, make a massive mistake that throws you and your family off course for the long run. And that's where financial planning gets into play. So normally we talk about economics on these shows. In light of everything going on geopolitically, economically, I want to spend this show talking more about financial planning. We have to focus on what we can control versus what we can't control. We can't control geopolitical events. We can't control wars. We can't control rumors of war, high interest rates, inflation. We can't control black swan events, things like COVID, or the housing bubble in 08 and 09, or the tech bubble in the late 90s. You know, those events that scare the pants off of investors. On the other hand, we can control how we react to these uncontrollable macro factors. Think about companies, and I would encourage you, if you want to be a really good investor, if you want to get really good at financial planning, look at how the best companies run their companies. They keep a lot of cash on the sidelines. They save for a rainy day. They spend less than they make. They keep debt to asset ratios low. It seems pretty obvious, but households like us, I believe, should be managed no differently. Further, and I continue to believe that the risk to investors is in the small space. It's small business, it's entrepreneurs, it's smaller households from an income standpoint at the lower end of the income spectrum that the Fed will eventually break. And I do believe this is coming. I do believe that the Fed will break something eventually. So beware of the risk. I'm not going in saying that everything's perfect out there. I have told you week in and week out that I do think the Fed is going to screw something up at some point. But you can protect yourself from most of the risk. You can insulate yourself. You can insulate your family from the problems that the Fed could create, one of which I think is going to be mass layoffs. I do think companies are going to process layoffs at a wide scale. The jobs report that just came out said that we gained 342,000 jobs, but if you actually dig into the numbers and dig past the headlines, what you'll find is that government produced and reported number actually shows that we lost a bunch of over 1 million full-time jobs, so quote unquote good jobs, and we gained a bunch of part-time jobs. And so what that would tell you is that that 342,000 number that came out of the BLS is really not accurate. We lost a bunch of great jobs and picked up a bunch of okay or not as good jobs. And because of this, I do believe it's not necessarily a canary in the coal mine, but when I talk to companies, when I talk to small business, when I talk to entrepreneurs, I can tell you for a fact they are tightening their belt. When you had a 2.5% rate that you could borrow on as a company in 2020 and 2021, and now that has shot up to 10 or 11 or 12%, it changes the way you think about growth. So the Fed is going to break something at some point. I do not think we are going to have a soft landing. That doesn't mean stocks are going to fall out of bed. We may have some downside ahead of us. I think ultimately what you could see, and we've talked about this in the past, is that during a recession, during really bad economic data, we could actually see stocks rally significantly. Why? Because stocks are that forward-looking indicator of what's to come. Stocks price in bad news ahead of time. They price in good news ahead of time. So it doesn't necessarily mean the world is coming to an end, but it does mean that you need to protect your family. So there's 5 things I would do. Number 1, pay down some debt, especially your bad debt. Pay it all down. Really focus on that right now. Consumers have basically spent all the excess savings they had from COVID. All that COVID cash is gone. They're starting to go back onto credit cards. Try not to be one of those people. Pay off those credit cards. Be so diligent about it. If you're having trouble, if you got a lot of credit card debt, and by the way, I can't tell you how many 6-figure households that I run into. I'm talking high 6 figures, 3, 4, 500,000 in income that still live paycheck to paycheck. Get your house in order with your debt. Get your house in order with your spending. And if you need extra help, do the Dave Ramsey program, take the baby steps, do what you got to do. I've had a lot of our clients who have really been helped from those programs, but you got to get that credit card debt in line. And I want you to think about credit card debt as my second recommendation. Spend less than you make. Seems so obvious, but if you are spending more than you make, which a lot of people don't realize they're doing, what happens is that credit card debt can never get paid off. Your other debt certainly doesn't have a chance of getting paid off. If you're thinking about buying a car, I would wait. I think car prices are going to come down in the next couple of years. I think what's going to happen is we are going to have some corrections in the car market as supply increases. You're already starting to see this with chips. The chip manufacturers were way oversupplied, and that's why they're struggling right now. You're going to see a lot of that come back down as demand wanes off. And I believe that you should be deferring some of those purchases as long as you can. Try not to take out a loan to buy a car. Try not to take out a loan to buy furniture and all this stuff. Defer some of those expenses if possible, because if you already have debt to begin with, you're going to have a really tough time if you're spending more than you make. I know it's obvious. I know this is so easy to say. It's another thing to right size your balance sheet. So think about what you spend on a monthly basis. Maybe you don't even know. Check out your expenses. Check out those credit card bills. Divide by 30 days. If you're spending 10 grand over the course of 30 days, or you're spending 5 grand over the course of 30 days, you know, you're going to find out when you download those statements. Just be careful and think about on a daily basis. Maybe we can cut back $100 a day. Maybe we can cut back on average $50 a day. Look at those subscriptions that you don't need to pay for. Maybe you don't need to go to Starbucks every day, right? Maybe you don't need to spend $5 on a coffee when you can make it at home for 25 cents. Maybe you don't need to go to lunch and buy a lunch out every day for $15 or $18. Maybe you can make a sandwich at home. So I really do mean this seriously. Take this as a advance warning. Hard times will come. I don't know if they're going to come next year or 6 months or 2. No, none of us have a crystal ball, but hard times will come. So just be careful. Get ahead of the problem now so that you don't end up like a lot of people scrambling in a correction. All right, number 3, build a cash reserve. While you're paying down your debt, make sure you pay yourself. I get the question all the time, Nick, I've got student loan debt, or I've got some other debt I've got to pay off, some personal loans or a car loan or something. Should I also be investing? Yes, the answer is of course you should be. Now, we can sit down on a one-on-one basis and we can figure that out. But even if you can do $100 a week, or you can do $50 a week, or $1,000 a month, whatever you can afford, do it now, because the market is in a correction. It is a buying opportunity, in my opinion. And the other thing is the factor of compounding is so significant that it's such an important thing that you got to get some money to work today while you simultaneously pay off debt. So do both at the same time. Obviously, you've got credit card debt. That may not be possible for 6 months, but try and make sure you're saving along paying off debt. Okay, number 4. Keep your resume and your network updated. Before a recession strikes, make sure you have your resume updated. You're keeping your professional network in the loop on your career status. I would stay highly active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an absolute goldmine. It's some of the best technology we've had from a career standpoint. Stay out there if you're still working, even if you have a great job. Make sure you're taking calls from recruiters once in a while. Make sure you're listening to, you're answering back messages from people from other companies that may want to poach you. Even though you're not going to make a move, or you may never make a move, I think it's a good idea to keep those networks activated just in case you do have to make a switch. The other thing I would encourage you to do is surround yourself with a group of wise counselors. Get yourself a really good fiduciary financial advisor. You could call us if you'd like, call somebody else. In all seriousness, get with somebody who can really put a plan together and then keep you on that plan. Then I'd make sure you have a really good tax person. Why? Because it's not going to cost you a whole lot to get your taxes done by a professional, but the difference is not just preparation, it's actual strategy and planning. That's what our group does. We have Stenger Tax Advisory. It's not just filing the return. And by the way, if that's all your CPA is doing for you, you deserve an upgrade. You may have to pay a little bit more for it, but there's so many different tax rules that have come up that have changed, and it's made it's so much more important to not just file the return, but actually do some prep work. When you turn 75, most of us, 72 to 75, somewhere in that range, are going to have to take a required minimum distribution. And by the way, if you pass a IRA to a non-spouse, so let's say you pass them to a kid, which is very common. You pass your IRAs to your children or your grandchildren. Well, they're going to be mandated to take out money within 10 years, which has completely changed the tax picture. So unless you really like giving Uncle Sam extra money, make sure you've got a good team, including your financial advisor. I would add a tax professional, CPA on as well. A state attorney, you got to have an estate attorney. At least do a review, okay? Even if you don't think you need a will and a trust, I'm telling you, you probably do more often than not. We saw it in 2020 when COVID was going on, massive spike in people getting their trusts and wills updated. Don't wait till a crisis to have your plan in place. And by the way, our attorney in-house, Brandon Ayers, Legacy and Life Law, he believes that any estate plan that was done before 2020, before the Secure Act was passed, doesn't necessarily have to be redone, but at least should be looked at. So make sure that you're talking with your estate attorney, your insurance agent, your recruiters. Make sure you've got a team around you. That's what companies do. It's not relying on just one person. And if you and your family are relying on one person, AKA yourself, I think you're at risk. I think you need to surround yourself with a wise group of counselors. Okay, number 5, last but not least, buy stocks when they're on sale. Every couple years, you get the buying opportunity of a lifetime to buy companies on the cheap. I believe that is today. It's not the cheapest time stocks. It's not the cheapest point stocks have ever been at. It's certainly not the deepest correction we've ever had, but it is a correction, and it could be one of the best ones we get for a while. You think, Nick, don't you think things are going to get worse? Well, of course, things could get worse, but the market's telling you that this is as bad as people think it's going to get for a while. Now, the market may be wrong. Sometimes it is, but most of the time, the market is spot on. You don't think that other people out there are worried about the same stuff you are? I mean, we live in the information economy. Information can be gathered at the speed of light. And so everybody everywhere can literally pull up Twitter, see what's going on in Israel with Hamas. They can see what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. They can see what the inflation rate is. They can see all the negativity out there, and they could decide to go sell their stocks. Well, guess what? That hasn't happened because a lot of the money, first of all, is tied up in 401k plans. Think about how many billions of dollars just naturally get invested into stocks each and every month just from people adding to their 401ks, their 457s, their 403b plans. Think about all the family offices and all the hedge funds and all the private equity firms that have so much cash on the sidelines they don't know what to do with it, who are going to be forced to buy stocks at higher prices down the road. So yeah, there's risk out there. Yes, there's downside. Of course there is. I'm not saying there's not. But what I am saying is that more likely than not, we will get out of the doom and gloom. Yeah, we may see a little bit more downside first, but we will get out of the doom and gloom. Stocks will rally, things will get better, and fast forward 5 or 10 years, stocks will be higher, statistically almost promised to be higher. Can't say it exactly, it's not guaranteed, it doesn't always happen, but 95% of the time, stocks are up over a 5 or 10 year time frame. So why in the world would you not buy today at a 10 or 15% correction? So use this as an opportunity, but you got to do the other things first. If you got credit card debt, make sure you're paying that off first. If you don't have a cash reserve, and I always tell people, if you don't have a cash reserve, start building it up slowly but surely. If you got young kids or you're a young family, I would say 6 months minimum, and it doesn't have to be all in cash or money market, but it should be accessible. It should be liquid money that you have available to you in case of a downturn or in case that you, God forbid, lose your job. And then if you're retired, I would increase that a little bit more. If you've just been newly retired in your 60s and 70s, I like having about 3 years, maybe even 4 or 5 years of living expenses in cash and short-term fixed income. And then as you get into your 80s and 90s, you may just want to bump that up depending on your net worth size. None of this is specific advice. You'd have to do this on a planning basis with an advisor. But when you get into your 70s and 80s, I like having a little bit higher just in case your medical expenses get bigger. We have seen families where unexpectedly somebody has to do long-term care, and it's very expensive, especially if you have one spouse in long-term care and one still living at the house. We just like to have a nice safe buffer built in. Do all those things first, and then when you can, you buy companies on the cheap. So here's the bottom line, okay? We are in scary times. We are in uncertain times. That is absolutely positively true. But we have never lived in not uncertain times. We have never lived in a time where it hasn't been scary. Every generation of Americans who has gone before us has lived in uncertain times. And that's the famous curse, may you live in interesting times. That's how it's always been. We are in a world of uncertainty. What you have to do as an investor with your financial plan, with your investments, is you have to deal with reality. Your only option is to get your house in order to prepare you and your family for a rainy day. And I don't mean go build a bunker in your backyard and fill it with canned food and ammunition and all the rest of it, although you may think that's a good idea. I would say history proves otherwise. By the time you get to use all your gold bars, there won't be any Jewel Oscos left to use them at. So just keep that in perspective. Get your house in order from a planning standpoint. Operate like a strong company would. Hold some cash reserves and treasuries. Make sure you've got liquidity. Make sure you're not over leveraged. Make sure you're spending less than you make. It's all the basics. And if you do that, you'll make it out the other side alive. It's just like 08 and 09. Think about all the people who lost their houses. Well, guess what? Most of us didn't lose our houses. Most of us didn't lose our cars and get them repoed and all the rest of it. Most of us were okay. It was a small percentage of people in 08 and 09 that were over leveraged, that made some mistakes, that didn't have their house in order, that got wiped out. You do not have to be a statistic. You do not have to be one of the people that participates in getting a giant rake in their face. You can survive. So take the actions now. Don't wait till a bad time comes. Don't wait till things get worse to make these actions. Start on it today so that you can make it out alive. That's all I've got for you this week. Episode 132 next week. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.